It was supposed to be just another quiet evening at the dojo. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the mats, casting long shadows across the space. A janitor, middle-aged, black, quiet, pushed his mop in rhythmic silence as he had done for the past 3 weeks. He was nearly invisible to the students, an unnoticed fixture in the background of their post-class chatter. But then something broke the calm. A voice, loud and cutting, echoed through the gym. "Hey, you there cleaning? How about a quick demonstration?" Standing in the center of the mat, Derek Mitchell's black belt gleamed as brightly as his arrogance. He wasn't just an instructor. He was the alpha of the room. And in that moment, he saw the janitor not as a man, but as an opportunity to show off. His students turned to look. Some chuckled nervously. Others looked away. But no one stopped him. "I bet you've never seen a real fight in your life, right?" Derek taunted, smug and loud. The janitor, James Washington, paused his mopping. His hand rested gently on the wooden handle, and his eyes lifted slowly to meet Derek's. There was no anger in his expression, no confusion, no fear, just calm. At 42, James had seen more than most. And though no one in that gym knew it, James wasn't always a janitor. He had been many things. One of them, a ghost of his past life that he had spent 2 decades trying to bury. "I don't want to bother you, Sensei," James replied, softly, respectfully. "Just finishing up here so you can get back to it." He lowered his gaze and went back to scrubbing a stubborn stain on the floor, as if the insult hadn't just occurred in front of a room full of students. But Derek wasn't finished. He laughed theatrically, turning to his class. "Look at this. The guy's afraid to even step on the mat." The students laughed again, though less convincingly. Some were clearly uncomfortable. Something about this didn't feel like martial arts anymore. It felt like a setup. What none of them knew, what even James's own daughter didn't know, was that he had once been known by a very different name. A name that had been whispered across arenas, printed in bold headlines, etched onto championship belts. 20 years ago, James had walked away from the spotlight. He had vanished from a world that cheered his every move after a single accident shattered everything. Derek continued, closing the distance with a grin soaked in mockery. "Come on, man, just a little demonstration. I bet you don't even know how to do a basic guard. Let's show my students the difference between someone who trains and someone who just cleans." That line hit something deep, an old nerve. Not rage, not pride, but something quieter, older. James met Derek's eyes for just a second. That glance, brief but piercing, made Derek falter. He didn't know why. But something about it made him take a half step back. The gym was silent. The mop water sat still in the bucket. The air seemed heavier. Derek tried to regain control of the moment, laughing again, but this time it sounded a little forced. "Just an educational demo," he insisted, suddenly unsure. "Nothing serious. Just to show them why respect matters." James stood slowly. He set the bucket aside, and for the first time, every pair of eyes turned fully toward him. Not the janitor, not the cleaner, but the man. He moved with a strange fluidity, too precise, too practiced, and when he spoke, his voice was as calm as still water before a storm. "All right," he said, staring directly at Derek. "But when we're done, you're going to apologize to all of them for turning this mat into a circus." And with that, the storm that had been sleeping for 20 years took its first breath. There are storms that rage out loud, shaking the walls, toppling trees, screaming their fury into the sky. And then there are the storms that lie buried, silent, invisible, waiting. James Washington had been living with one for 20 years. As he stood there, the mop bucket beside him and every eye in the gym now fixed on him, James wasn't really in that room anymore. He was back under the searing lights of Las Vegas, hearing the roar of the crowd echoing in his ears. The National Gymnasium was packed that night, the smell of sweat, anticipation, and fear thick in the air. His opponent, Victor the Demolition Man Petrov, was a monster of a man built like a steel vault, infamous for ending fights in under 2 rounds. James had stood across from him without blinking. Back then, they didn't call him James. They called him Silent Storm, 5-time MMA world champion. A fighter so disciplined, so composed, he barely spoke before matches. His silence wasn't weakness. It was the eye of a hurricane. Calculated calm before devastation. That night, he won by technical knockout in the 2nd round. But what happened after that win would haunt him for the rest of his life. Tony Hammer Rodriguez, his best friend, his training partner, his brother in all but blood, was with him for a routine sparring session 2 days later. They were both tired, emotions were high, the media was relentless, but James hadn't noticed the signs. The pressure had been building, not just in his muscles but in his soul. The racist heckles from the Vegas crowd still rang in his head. "Look at that little black guy," one man had shouted. "I bet he won't last 3 rounds against a real fighter." Those words stuck. They festered. During the sparring, James struck just a little too hard. A split-second combination, meant to train, not hurt, landed wrong. Tony stumbled, fell. His head hit the mat with a sickening thud, and he never got back up. The doctor said it was a freak accident, that it could have happened to anyone. But James knew better. It wasn't just an accident. It was a moment born from pressure, from buried pain, from a need to prove himself to a world that had already decided who he was and what he wasn't. He had let rage leak into control, and someone he loved paid the price. Since that day, he made a vow. Never again. Never again would he step into a ring. Never again would he trust himself with the force he once wielded so easily. He folded up his legacy, shut down his career, and disappeared into the background of the world. Simple jobs, quiet nights, no cameras, no risk, until tonight. Now here he was, standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of a gym in Denver, a mop still wet with soap beside him, and a man with a black belt taunting him with the same sneer, the same subtle racism that had nearly destroyed him all those years ago. "Come on, Janitor," Derek sneered. "Just a little demo, or is that too complicated for someone who just pushes a mop?" Sarah Chun watched from the side of the mat, her hands clenched in her lap. She was young, a purple belt, and a grad student in sports psychology. She wasn't a master yet, but she had spent the last 2 years documenting cases of discrimination in sports. What she saw now made her skin crawl. There was something predatory about Derek's tone, something that wasn't about teaching or respect. It was about dominance. But it was James's body language that truly held her attention. The way he moved, even when just standing up, there was a rhythm to it, a smoothness that didn't belong to a beginner. When he reached for the mop bucket and set it aside, his shoulders aligned naturally, his knees slightly bent. Every micro movement spoke of training, of muscle memory, of discipline that couldn't be faked. This man is not who he seems, Sarah thought. Derek, oblivious, continued circling like a shark smelling blood. "Come on, you scared? Or are you just going to stand there like a lamppost like you do all day?" His voice dripped with condescension, but his words were more than that. They were matches falling near gasoline. James didn't flinch. His eyes remained calm, focused. He had heard these kinds of jabs before, but now something was shifting inside him. Not anger, not rage, but purpose. For 20 years he had buried the storm. Tonight someone had found the switch. His chest tightened, not from fear, but from awakening. It was as if his muscles were remembering who they were, what they once did. His spine straightened, not from pride, but from weight lifting off. The weight of hiding, of shrinking himself to be safe. "Last chance, buddy," Derek warned, puffing his chest. "Either you accept the demo like a man, or I call security and have your ass thrown out. You'll be out of a job by morning." James's eyes lifted slowly, and when they locked with Derek's, something passed between them. Not a threat, not a challenge, but something deeper, something ancestral. The kind of gaze that doesn't demand silence, but creates it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move forward. But somehow the entire room fell quiet. "All right," James said, his voice calm, measured, unshaken. "But when we're done, I want you to explain to your students why you turned a place of learning into a circus of humiliation." A beat passed. Derek tried to laugh, but his voice cracked slightly. "Explain? Man, you're going to be the one apologizing to the mat." But even Derek was beginning to sense it. Something had shifted. The storm wasn't on its way. It was already in the room. James turned his back to set the mop aside, and when he turned again, his movements, so small, so precise, sent a chill through Sarah's spine. There was too much grace in his step, too much economy in his breath, and for the first time, the students watching didn't see a janitor. They saw something else, something they didn't yet understand, but would never forget. Derek Mitchell adjusted his stance with the confidence of someone who had never truly been tested. feet shoulder-width apart, guard up, weight slightly forward. It was a textbook pose, one he'd used for years to intimidate beginners and impress his loyal students. As he settled into it now, grinning like a performer preparing for his grand finale, he genuinely believed he was about to give everyone in the gym a memorable show. He still thought James Washington was just a janitor. James, meanwhile, stood absolutely still. No aggressive posture, no raised hands. His breathing was measured, slow, steady, controlled like a metronome. But to those who paid attention, something was shifting. His chest rose with a rhythm so precise it almost felt choreographed. His eyes, soft yet unblinking, never once strayed from Derek's. They didn't burn with rage or anticipation. They simply watched. Sarah Chun sat frozen at the edge of the mat. She didn't know what she was seeing yet, but her instincts were screaming that it wasn't ordinary. There was a stillness in James that wasn't laziness or hesitation. It was calculation, containment, something like a lion pacing inside the skull of a man. Derek bounced once on his feet, trying to amp up the energy. "Still got time to back out, Mop Man," he smirked. "But hey, it's your funeral." James didn't respond. Instead, he took a breath, not deep, not forced, just a breath. And with it, the room shifted. Sarah felt it before she understood it. The way a bird senses a coming storm long before the clouds roll in. She blinked and pulled out her phone, fingers moving quickly. She opened Google, typed Las Vegas National Gym Martial Arts. What came up made her blood run cold. Headlines, articles, a name. James Silent Storm Washington, 5-time world champion, undefeated, retired after a tragic accident. She looked up, heart pounding. This man is a legend, and no one knows it but him. Derek lunged forward, textbook jab. Fast, clean, aimed straight for James's nose. But James wasn't there. He hadn't dodged in the dramatic, flashy way you'd expect in movies. No duck, no spin. He simply leaned back, a quarter inch, just enough. The jab sliced air. Derek's brow furrowed, surprised. He tried again. A quick 1-2. Jab, then straight punch. James pivoted, just one foot. The rest of his body followed like silk. The second punch missed completely, leaving Derek's shoulder overextended. Before he could recover, he launched a hook, his signature move. Powerful, sharp. It had ended dozens of sparring matches, but it meant nothing. James had already slid back, exactly one step, letting the fist pass just centimeters from his chin. Silence. The students, forming a half circle around the mat, had gone from uneasy curiosity to stunned awe. No one moved. Sarah was holding her breath. Derek backed away half a step now, blinking. James finally spoke, his voice low and calm, like a professor pointing out an error on a paper. "Your guard's too high. Leaves your ribs open. You drop your right shoulder before every hook. And your base is too narrow. You can't absorb recoil." Derek flushed. "Shut up!" He launched another flurry. Jab, straight, hook, high kick. All his favorites. James weaved like a shadow. His feet barely touched the mat. But his control was flawless. No wasted energy, no strain. He wasn't reacting, he was predicting. As if he had fought Derek 1,000 times in his head before the first punch ever landed. By now, beads of sweat formed on Derek's forehead. His breath quickened. He couldn't land a single hit. The janitor, no. This man was untouchable. James didn't gloat. He didn't counterattack. He didn't raise his fists. He just waited. Sarah's fingers flew across her phone. Articles confirmed it. Silent Storm. Retired at 29. Undefeated. Disappeared after an accident involving his training partner, Tony Rodriguez. Her eyes widened. The janitor is one of the greatest fighters alive. Derek's punches began to lose shape, his technique sloppier with each attempt, his mind clouded by disbelief. James stepped forward, slowly. Derek stumbled back, bumping into the edge of the mat. James stopped, still calm, still centered. "Want to know the difference between a man who learned to fight in gyms," he said, "and a man who learned to survive in rings?" Derek sneered. "Just shut up and fight." James stepped in. With zero warning, he lifted his right hand, not balled into a fist, not drawn back to strike, but simply extended. He placed the flat of his palm gently on Derek's chest and pushed. No, not a shove, not a strike. Just a simple transfer of pressure. A whisper of energy. But it was enough. Derek's body flew. His feet left the ground. His torso sailed back through the air like he had been hit by a truck. He crashed to the mat nearly 6 feet away with a thud that echoed through the gym. Gasps filled the room. A student dropped their water bottle. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. Derek lay there stunned. Not hurt, but shaken in a way he didn't understand. James didn't move. He didn't posture. He didn't advance. He just stood, breathing slow, steady, serene. That single touch, calculated and controlled, carried 2 decades of silence, 2 decades of guilt, rage, discipline, memory. That touch wasn't about domination. It was a statement. I am still here, and I never forgot who I am. Sarah stepped forward, her phone trembling in her hand. Guys, she whispered to the students, he's not just a janitor. Everyone turned. She lifted the screen. His name is James Silent Storm Washington, 5-time MMA world champion, retired undefeated. He's a legend. The silence that followed was almost reverent. Derek, still on the floor, finally sat up, his face pale, his chest heaving. He looked up at the man he had mocked. You're him. James didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence had already said it all. For several seconds, the gym was suspended in complete silence, as if reality itself had paused to recalibrate. The echo of Derek's body hitting the mat still lingered faintly in the air, but the true shock came not from the impact. It came from Sarah's trembling voice. She held her phone up high, voice barely above a whisper at first, but growing in clarity and conviction. James Washington, she read, eyes wide. Also known as Silent Storm, 5-time MMA world champion, retired undefeated after a 22-year career, widely considered one of the most technically gifted fighters in the sport's history. Every head in the room turned toward James, the janitor, the man who cleaned their floors, the man Derek mocked, belittled, pushed, now revealed as a legend. Derek didn't move. He remained seated on the mat, his knees bent awkwardly, sweat pooling around his neck. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came. His face lost all color. The bravado, the arrogance, the smug theatricality, all of it had drained away in an instant. James remained where he stood, calm and composed. He didn't bask in the attention. He didn't puff his chest or smile triumphantly. If anything, he looked tired. A quiet kind of exhaustion, not from the physical effort, but from carrying the weight of a past that no one had asked about until now. I'm not here to impress anyone, James said softly, finally breaking the silence. I'm just a man trying to live a quiet life. I clean floors. I keep things in order. That's enough for me. But for the students, it wasn't enough. They stood frozen in a daze, digesting the revelation. One by one, their expressions shifted from disbelief to awe to something deeper. Shame. Shame that they had laughed, that they had watched, that they hadn't spoken up. Tanya, a younger student who had once idolized Derek, now couldn't meet James's eyes. She looked down at her own belt, suddenly questioning everything she thought she knew about martial arts hierarchy. Her rank, her admiration for Derek, her silence. Marcus, a fellow student, stepped forward slowly. Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I didn't know. James met his gaze and nodded. That's the thing about silence, he replied. It often says more than words ever could. Derek still hadn't moved, his shoulders slumped forward, his gaze fixed on the mat. He looked like a man trying to retreat into himself, searching for a way to undo what had just happened. I didn't know, he muttered, voice hoarse. If I had known who you were. James turned to him, voice calm but unflinching. And if I weren't him? If I were just another janitor without credentials? Would it have been okay then? The question cut like a blade, not because it was loud or angry, but because it was true. It hung in the air with a weight that made everyone in the gym feel smaller. Derek swallowed hard, his jaw twitched, his hands trembled slightly. The shame was now physical. No, he said finally, the word cracking in his throat. It wouldn't have been okay. I was wrong. James nodded again, a small gesture of acknowledgement. An apology is a start. But it's just that, a start. Change isn't about what you say when you're caught. It's about what you do after. At that moment, Sarah stepped forward. The phone was still in her hand, but she wasn't using it anymore. Her eyes were locked on James, filled with a strange mix of awe and urgency. Mr. Washington, she said carefully, I know you don't want the spotlight, but would you consider teaching? Not fighting techniques, maybe, but lessons like this, about character, about what martial arts should be about. A murmur rippled through the gym. Heads nodded, eyes lit up. James exhaled slowly. I didn't come here to teach, he said, but maybe there's something worth sharing. He looked around the room, at the faces once indifferent, now wide open. He saw something shift in their eyes, not just respect, reverence, yes, but also introspection. "I'll stay," he said, "not as your sensei, but as a reminder that belts don't make you better. Choices do, and sometimes the people you ignore are the ones who could teach you the most." The students erupted into scattered applause, not out of habit, but from the emotional release of witnessing something unforgettable. It wasn't for the demonstration. It was for the man who had taught them more in 20 minutes than their instructor had in months. Derek, still kneeling, looked up at James again. "I meant what I said. I'm sorry, and I know I have a lot to change." James walked over to him and extended a hand. Derek hesitated, then took it. James helped him up, gently, but his next words were not gentle. They were precise and firm. "Change isn't a speech," he said. "It's a habit. Start today, every day. And remember, power isn't what you hold over people, it's what you give back." Derek nodded slowly. For the first time, there was no performance, no deflection. Just a man who had been stripped down to the truth and was finally ready to rebuild from it. The gym, once filled with laughter at a janitor's expense, now pulsed with a new energy. Quiet, respectful, humble. James didn't linger in the glow. He grabbed the mop and walked to the edge of the room as if to resume his duties. But now every eye followed him, not out of pity, not out of disbelief, but out of reverence. He had unmasked the real lesson, and it wasn't about fighting, it was about seeing. And now they did. 3 months later, the gym was no longer the same place it had once been. The walls still bore the same posters, the same rows of punching bags still swung gently in the air, and the mat still smelled faintly of sweat and determination. But something fundamental had shifted. The culture, the energy, the way students looked at one another. The gym had changed owners quietly after a wave of negative publicity and a flurry of student withdrawals. The viral clip Sarah Chun had captured on her phone of Derek being sent flying by a janitor's gentle touch had sparked conversations across martial arts forums, social media channels, and even local news. But it wasn't just the spectacle that held people's attention. It was the lesson. And it was that lesson that had reshaped everything. James Washington now stood at the front of the room, no longer in janitor overalls, but not in a traditional jai either. He wore a simple black shirt and training pants, unadorned by rank or title. To the students, he was known simply as Coach James. He didn't teach punches or kicks. Others handled the technique. What James taught couldn't be measured with drills. It was deeper. He taught silence, observation, empathy, restraint, respect. His sessions were always packed, not because he dazzled with flashy moves, but because every word landed like a perfectly executed strike. "The dojo is sacred," he would say. "Not because of the mats, but because of the minds and hearts we shape here." Meanwhile, Derek Mitchell had taken up a position at a small neighborhood gym across town. It wasn't glamorous. There were no neon signs or long waiting lists. But for the first time in years, Derek wasn't chasing admiration. He showed up early, cleaned the mats himself, listened more than he spoke, and corrected mistakes with humility. He never mentioned the incident. He didn't have to. The lesson had marked him in ways belts and titles never could. One Thursday afternoon, Sarah stayed behind after class. She stood near the edge of the mat, watching as James stacked training pads with the same quiet efficiency he once used to mop floors. "Coach," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. What you taught me, it's not in any textbook. No class on martial arts philosophy ever prepared me for that moment." James looked up, smiled faintly. "The best lessons," he said, "are the ones we don't see coming." She nodded. "You taught me that strength doesn't have to roar to be felt." He paused for a moment, eyes distant. Then he replied, "True strength doesn't need to be displayed to be recognized. It lives in how we treat people when no one's watching." Sarah smiled. "That should be on the wall." James chuckled. "Then people would stop listening and start memorizing." That day, as the students filed out and the light of the setting sun spilled across the gym floor, something was left behind in the air, something sacred. An understanding that greatness wasn't loud. It didn't need a spotlight. It swept floors. It held the door open. It stood still while others underestimated it, only to rise when justice demanded it. Greatness doesn't shout, it humbles. But that wasn't the last time James would be tested. In another city, another ring, a different man would make the same mistake, and this time it would be broadcast live. Stay tuned.